Hi everyone, a very warm welcome and a massive greeting in terms of Happy International Social Work Day. In terms of the event today, it would be really helpful if everybody could go on mute so we can hear a little bit of interference. If everybody could go on mute in the background, that would be appreciated. Thank you. And for those who are on camera, it would be absolutely great if we could do a bit of a wave and say Happy International Social Work Day. So go for it. Hey, it's wonderful to have international colleagues with us today. We are part of a global profession. I'm really proud to celebrate social work in all of its forms. And we would really welcome people joining in the chat today and putting any international messages. And also we have been reminded as well, it's Happy Equinox Day as well. So please message in the chat because we'd love to know where you're from. So in terms of introducing myself, my name is Maris Strachless. I'm the National Director with BASW England. And today it's a real pleasure to celebrate the theme for this year from International Federation of Social Work, which is respecting diversity through joint action. For the purpose of this event, we will be focusing on refugees and people seeking asylum and looking at an international and domestic response. We have a fabulous lineup of speakers and panel members, including colleagues from Spain, Italy, Greece and the UK. I'll be letting people introduce themselves to share their work and their key messages for social workers today. Before we start the session, we have a few housekeeping items. So we are asking all participants, excluding the speakers and panel members, to put your microphones on mute and switch cameras off throughout the webinar. If you want to get in touch or ask a question, please include that in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen and send through any questions and comments. Please note that the chat is visible, so please be respectful in your messaging, which I'm sure you will be. If you are on social media and would like to do a tweet, then please use the following hashtag. Hashtag BASW ENGWSWD23, which you can see on all of the slides. As you can see, we have several panel members joining us for the session today who will be speaking to the theme of this year's conference. And just to reiterate, if you can all go on mute, that would be really appreciated. Our first speakers include Emilio, Eleanor and Sophia, all associate assistant professors, researchers and co-authors of Migration and Social Work, Approaches, Visions and Challenges. It is my pleasure to welcome you today, and we'll start off by hearing from Emilio.
Hello, good afternoon. We are really happy to be here and to share this time with you all. We really appreciate this invitation, and certainly we have many things to share with you. I would like first to ask the person who is in charge of presenting the slide to put the first one, please. Yes. If you see this image represents a woman, and it's a sculpture, and it is placed in the harbor of Gijón. It's a town in northern Spain. And the north of Spain was especially affected during many years of sending immigrants abroad to America, to the Caribbean. And this image represents a farewell, but also a sense of hope. So we wanted to start this presentation with this image because we are concerned about what is happening in Europe. We are aware of what is happening in the UK with the new illegal migration bill, as it is called. We are aware of what happened with Gary Lineker and his declarations about criticizing the new law, but also we are in the Mediterranean area, we are in the south of Europe, and we of course are affected about what is going on with migrants flows trying to enter the European shores from the different migration routes. So your illegal migration bill that the government is going to enact and initiatives which are quite similar that are being enacted or at least are being discussed by the German government, by the Danish government, by the EU government, trying to reinforce the EU borders and prevent the entry of migrants in irregular situation, of course, raises concerns of us about how we as social workers who are trying to promote justice, who are trying to be transformative, we are who are really looking forward for a world who is much more fair and based on justice and human rights. What can we do and how are we affected? Please, if you are so kind, please pass the slide to the second one. Just some figures. We don't want to stay here, but just to know that actually we are experiencing a flow of migrants coming to different parts of Europe. In the next slide, you can see the different migration routes. Please go ahead, and we can distinguish several migration routes. You can see in the map that there is the southeastern Europe route, which is a territory, is not based by people coming from the sea, but from the land, from the territory. And then we have the Mediterranean routes, Eastern Mediterranean routes, which has the destination to Greece mainly, Central Mediterranean route, with the destination of Italy, and the Western Mediterranean route, which main destination is Spain. Also, the Northwest American Maritime route, the destination are the Canary Islands. Of course, this represents a big and intense challenge to not only to the governments of the EU members who are of course bordering or are natural borders with these countries, but also to professions such as social workers who are trying to work for the dignity and integration of these people. And in most of the cases, we are part of a system that does not welcome migrants, but also we feel part of a mechanism that oppresses them. Apart from these Mediterranean routes and land routes, of course, there is another route which is not an EU route, unfortunately, which is the route of people coming from France to the UK, that now it is the concern of the UK government as far as we know now. And also, in the table on the left, you can see that these are dangerous routes. Many people die trying to enter the European borders. This danger is more and more as the EU policies and maybe the UK policies are making it more difficult to enter. There is more and more surveillance, there are more and more borders, there are more and more fences, there are more and more drones trying to control it. And of course, there is another element, which is the externalization of EU borders. We know that, for example, the EU has externalized the process of refugees in Turkey, but also we have externalized the control of the Mediterranean and the rescue of people trying to enter Europe by giving some ships to the Libyan government to rescue them and bring them to facilities and to premises on which the minimum of dignity is not respected, on which there are violations of human rights, and the EU and the European governments just put a blind eye on it, and they just consider that it must be done, it must be managed, and there is no problem if human rights are violated. And it is something similar on what Suella Braverman or your prime minister says that the new immigrants illegal migration bill clashes with the European Convention of Human Rights or the UN Convention on Refugees' Rights. They don't seem to bother. It doesn't matter. The question is how to process these entries. The process is how to control migration, and the process is to keep our borders safe. And it doesn't matter if human rights are violated or not. So we, Sofia, Elena, and myself, as academics, we were really concerned about this situation. As academics, we don't want to be in a bubble. We don't want to keep silent in this reality. We are not practitioners, not many practitioners. We are academics, but of course, we wanted to make a contribution to the thought, a critical thought, a critical research on this issue. And that is why we decided to edit a book that was about what was going on in different countries of Europe regarding how were refugees and migrants being treated in their different countries. And we edited that book, and we collected experiences from different countries, from Scandinavian countries, from Central European countries, from Mediterranean countries, but also from the UK and Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. So the book we edited is not just a publishing product. We don't want it to be just that. We want it to be an instrument of reflection, of concern, of reaction, and of course of promotion of the dignity of migrants and refugees, and of course something that could be put at the service of practitioners, of social workers at the very grassroots level. So please, if you are so kind, and pass the slide. These are some examples of how the EU is responding to the reality of migration and asylum. I don't know if you are familiarized with the journal EU Observers. It is quite good. And of course, the chronicles and the news regarding migration and the opinion columns are really, really very well fundamented, very clear, very critical, and very inspiring. So I asked the journal to give me permission to put these headlines. And of course, if you have a look to them, it says that EU responds to Italy journalists with more support to Libya, which is a country which does not respect human rights. Spain accused of Melilla migrant death cover-up. Border fences are an indictment of EU state asylum failures. 8 EU states press for more Turkey-style migrant swap deals. This is quite recent. Most Frontex deportations to take place from Germany, Italy. So our migration policy is mainly an oppressive policy, a policy that violates human rights. And of course, this is an example of this. Please, if you are so kind, go ahead. I don't know if I'm going too fast. I'm sorry because of my English. My English is not, it comes from Southern Europe. So maybe in some words, I don't use the proper word or the proper expression. I'm sorry about this. But of course, what I meant is that our research is purposed. So we are concerned about how migrants and refugees are being treated around the world that is more and more a fortress. I wanted to display a map with how the borders in the world were displayed, and it is really worrying and really fearful, very scary. We also are aware of the importance of social work as a profession and a discipline, as it is said in the global definition of social work, that can make a difference in the way migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers are defending their rights. But also we know that sometimes, independently of our willingness, we are on the side of the oppressors. And this worries us a lot. And also we know that during the years of the crisis, not only the economic crisis, but also the pandemic crisis, social workers in the migration field were working during very, very hard working conditions, particularly in Southern Europe, with very limited resources due to austerity policies and very scarce support. Many, many times being asked to implement discriminatory and exclusionary policies that stigmatized and criminalized users, and in a very hard situation of precarity. So at this moment, we are lecturers, we are social work professors, and from this position, our aim is to serve the discipline, to support social workers on the field for contributing in helping migrant people. That is what we try to do. Please go ahead. I asked Javier Bauluz, who is a Pulitzer Prize, who is a very, very committed person, to give me this picture. So this picture is authorized, and it represents a moment on which some people are arriving to the Canary Islands, and they are, of course, being identified by police forces. If you look behind that, you can see a car with a tourist sat on a chair, smoking a cigarette, as if something and anything happened. Anything had to do with that. Our feeling is that we as social workers, of course, want to have to do with this and want to be committed. I chose this picture because of its meaning, about different attitudes to have when we see oppression, when we see how human rights are violated, and we can stay smoking a cigarette and looking to other part, or just responding to this situation. Please go ahead. So, well, this is the cover of our book. We feel proud of it. It was a wonderful work made together, and of course it is nice because it represents different perspectives from different countries, but the common ground of people working with migrants and refugees. So the different cosmovisions are represented, the different ideas, perspectives are there. And this is why we like it so much. Please go ahead. So what we wanted to do to produce a comparative analysis of contemporary social work practice on migration and asylum, but also to reflect on how effective social work is on the field in terms of promoting human dignity and social justice. We don't really like the word effectiveness, but I think you understand us when we say how effective social work is in the field, and that is to which extent are we capable of promoting human dignity and not be paralyzed by oppressive practices from our governments. That is the idea. And of course, we wanted to be a source of reflection on how social work education programs can contribute to train professionals, because we are lecturing every day. I was lecturing this morning, and when I saw my students, I wanted to see professionals committed with human rights, and I saw the structure of our universities. When I saw how rigid some structures are, how lack of creativeness still exists in academia, how market-oriented in some aspects academia is, we want to react against this. And that is why we also are critical to the role played by our academia at different universities. We also want to promote our reflection. We want to promote. This was the aim of the book. And the three of us the three editors shared this feeling. And it was very easy because we found that the different authors of the chapter also share this perspective. So there is hope. There is hope. We have reasons to be hopeful about the change. We think we can reasonably think that this can be done. Please, let's go ahead. Well, of course, some figures, pages, chapters, authors, countries, blah, 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 which is nice. Let's go ahead on this. Well, some things we found, and which we would like to share with you. What we found was that the situation of migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees became worse during the pandemic. Also, that migrants and refugees' needs and rights are not being met and respected enough in Europe. The feeling of not being listened, nor being understood, nor being respected in their traditions makes of them feel that they have no sense of place. And this is a powerful sentence. Not have sense of place when you have migrated abroad, when you have put at risk your family, your belongings, your job. It is very sad. And of course, I think it is an ethical concern for us. Also, we found out, and it is something that we could discuss in the question and answers part, that most social workers do not feel confident enough when working with migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers. So this is a call for us, and this is a call for you, and this is a call for the community that is working with this. How are we lecturing? To which extent are migration contents present in social work lectures? To which extent social workers are being trained in working with migrants and refugees, not only in England, but throughout the world? Uh, and this is another result. Academia and specifically faculties of social work are not sufficiently providing contents and skills needed to have proper sensitivity and knowledge on these fields. This is clear. This is something that we found, and this is something we are not, of course, proud of, and we need to change this. But there is hope. There exist some good practices implemented by social work at case group and community level that are inspiring and provide some hope. And there are some good experiences, for example, in the Canary Islands, when social workers raised their voice when police was using oppressive techniques towards migrants, and they claimed the jury, and they got some good results. There are some other examples. So as a result, as a conclusion, we can say that social work research, when connected with reality and not just connected with the figure of publishing per se, is crucial to promote transformation from the top level to the bottom in the way migration and asylum is being tackled. The experienced knowledge of social workers and people in need is essential in social work, education, and practice. So the voices of migrants, asylum seekers, but also practitioners should be more heard in academia. It's something we consider, we think. Please, if you don't mind, go ahead with another slide. No, not this one, the previous one. Yes. So, some thoughts and suggestions. We think that still we can get some inspiration from social work pioneers. It's still a source of inspiration for us if we read Jane Addams' books or some others. I think that we can get some strength, some intuitions that it is nice and are important and are effective for our work. It is crucial to make the invisible visible, evidencing, voicing, exposing human rights violations through coalitions, associations, research, networks, and events like the one that is taking place today. Also, let's try from ourselves, keeping the light on our representations, our fears, our relationships with diversities, our sensible thumb, our culture, our privileges. Yes, it is important also to have a look to ourselves. Another point, it is important to advocate for resources and social change. We need investment for health, social care and education, welcoming and inclusive societies, human rights that can not only survive crisis, but empower communities and people. It is important to highlight how, for example, the question and the issue of mental health has been tackled for example, in the EU directive of temporary uh, um, assistance to migrants and refugees coming from Ukraine. It is interesting to see that, for example, the mental health issue has been considered in these resources, and we wonder why these mental health issues have not been considered in other initiatives that have been implemented by the European Union when it is so crucial, for example, for the integration of migrants. And this is important. Just to advocate for this is crucial for this and for other benefits that are not benefits but rights that are recognized by the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, or civil and political rights. Of course, we have a wonderful profession, and I think social workers are crucial in the process of integration and liberation and respecting the dignity of migrants and refugees. We are promoters of human rights. I every day tell my students that they are not just people that deliver benefits, but they are promoters of human rights. And for that sake, they must be trained, they must read, they must learn, and of course, they must be very, very keen on raising awareness on this. And for this purpose, we are very happy to celebrate this day with you, Sophia, Elena, and myself. We are very happy to have been invited and to share these thoughts, and also to be part of this large and committed community on which we all are involved, and really looking forward to a better future for migrants and refugees. So thank you very, very much. And well, we are open to your questions, and that's all.
Thank you so much, Emilio. Just to share that we'll be taking questions during the panel, but I would just like to reinforce, some of your really strong messaging in terms of the EU borders being reinforced, the dangerous routes that people are having to take in terms of potential loss of life as well, when all they're doing is purely seeking sanctuary. The messaging that you're giving about social workers and the role of social workers in terms of really advocating for human dignity and social justice. And just before we move on to our next speaker, I think a really powerful message and a very pertinent message from you was how important it is and that it's crucial to make the invisible visible. So thank you so much, all of you, and we will be taking questions during the panel session. Thank you. So I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Claire Mosley, who'll be talking about her work in terms of her establishment as setting up Care for Calais and other work that Claire is involved in. Claire, over to you.
Thank you so much. 8 years ago, I actually knew nothing about refugees or politics. And then one day I read an article about people drowning in the Mediterranean. And I asked my husband why people were drowning in the Mediterranean. And we didn't know, so I started reading about it. Because we go on holiday there, and there are navies and there are lifeboats, and nobody should be drowning in the Mediterranean, then or now. And it was that reading that led me to find a group of people who were driving down to Calais to meet some of the people who had crossed the Mediterranean. So in something unprecedented for me, I decided to go with them. And I drove down in my car to Calais with some people that I'd never met before, and arrived on the Saturday at a camp where there were 6,000 people living on 1 square mile of dirt. And when I walked in, the first person I met actually said to me, "Excuse me, do you have any food in your handbag? And I said, no. And he said, I haven't eaten. Do you have any crisps or biscuits or anything? I don't have any food, which was incredibly shocking. And later on that day, somebody else came up to me, a man with a baby, and said, excuse me, madam, please take my daughter. She is no trouble at all. Just take her with you. Please take my daughter, and tried to give me a small child, a baby, which had such an impact on me. It actually completely changed my life. I went back on the Sunday, and on the Wednesday, I said to my husband, I have to go back there. I can't stop thinking about it. And I ended up driving back down on the Wednesday, just with a thought of we have to do something to help these people, but no plan or intention. But I actually ended up staying there 2.5 years. And when I first went, I actually just thought, if we can get some food or some blankets or some shelter for these people, I thought if we can just help them for a couple of months in this immediate emergency, somebody else more important or more knowledgeable than us, you know, the Red Cross or a government or somebody will come along and help them and fix this situation. And then we won't have to do it anymore. I never dreamt that we would end up starting a charity, that we would still be here 8 years later, that the situation would continue. But it has continued. There are still people living in Calais, sleeping outside with no shelter, that would not have food if we didn't give it to them, that are being treated badly by our government and by the French government, with some kind of idea that if we treat them badly, they will go away and stop coming. But this is nearly 8 years later now, and it's never stopped them coming. It's never made them go away, and yet we still do it. And so our charity is still there, and unfortunately our governments are still treating them badly. And people are still drowning in the Mediterranean, and that hasn't stopped them crossing either, and yet we still let them drown. And much to my horror, I found out that the law that actually allows European countries to let people drown in the Mediterranean, with the mistaken belief that that will stop them crossing, was actually proposed by the British government. And it was a big shock to me to find out that was proposed by the British government, but it was. And then 2.5 years ago, we've been working in Calais now for nearly 8 years, but 2.5 years ago, our charity actually started to get calls from people that we'd met in Calais who are now in the UK, who were phoning up our volunteers here, saying that they were having problems in the UK, that we had people in the UK who didn't have clothes, who sometimes didn't have shoes. For the first time, I met a man queuing outside a Tesco supermarket with no shoes. People in the UK who didn't have coats for winter, sometimes didn't have food, people who couldn't access medical appointments, people who didn't have legal representations. So we started working in the UK. And now our charity has grown so much that we work in 200 asylum hotels across the UK, working with thousands of people in the UK who desperately need our help. We actually now are a much bigger charity in the UK than we are in France, because the policy of our government is now to treat people just as badly in the UK as we do in northern France. When I first started working with refugees, I would have said that my work was purely humanitarian. It was simply a response to need. Like I say, I didn't know anything about politics. We were just giving people who were hungry food, people who were cold blankets. But because of the way our government treats refugees, that work has become political. So I didn't choose to be political. Our government has made it political because our government has chosen to treat refugees badly, and that makes what I do political. And now, unfortunately, we have the illegal migration bill. This bill provides for mass deportation and detention of refugees. People will no longer be able to apply for asylum in our country. It's absolutely draconian in its response, but that is how our government wants to treat refugees. Our government calls refugees illegal migrants. That is an incredibly dangerous thing, incredibly dangerous terminology to use, because when you talk about people as illegal, it puts associations in people's minds. People who aren't as close to the situation as I am By calling people illegal, it suggests that they're doing something wrong. It effectively suggests that they are criminals when they're not. Like, the refugee law says that people are allowed to enter a country illegally to claim asylum because refugees have no choice. They often don't have passports or visas. They have no other way to travel. But calling them illegal migrants has made a lot of our country think that they are criminals and they have done something wrong. And that turns people against them and means that people think it's okay to treat them badly. It's okay not to give them their human rights. And that is incredibly dangerous. So right now we're working on a policy for safe passage. Giving people safe passage from Calais would mean that they don't get in small boats. Giving them safe passage would mean that they don't pay people smugglers. So there actually is a much more humane and much more effective way to stop the small boats. But that's another argument. So the question is, what can we do about it? Well, firstly, we have to campaign. If you look at our website or our social media, so careforcalais.org or our Facebook or our Twitter, we have ongoing campaigns there. The most important one is the Safe Passage one. So please do have a look at it, share it, follow it as much as you can. Really importantly, we need volunteers. We actually do have a lot of volunteers who are social workers. Social workers make absolutely amazing volunteers because you have the expertise we need. You know how to work with vulnerable people. You know how to help with people who have suffered mental trauma. You know how to work with unaccompanied children because wars do create a lot of orphans. The expertise you have is so invaluable to us. We have volunteer social workers across the UK and we've had delegations of social workers in Calais. So volunteering is fantastic. And of course, if you don't have time for that, we always need donations. Care for Calais is quite unusual. We have no government funding at all, and we have no big funders. All of our money comes from ordinary people, and a lot of it comes from ordinary people on low incomes. So please do have a look at our website, have a look at us on social media. It's careforcalais.org, Care for Calais on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Please do have a look. Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you, Claire, and another incredibly powerful presentation. I think your passion and your commitment and dedication has really shone through today in terms of the work and setting up the charity, Calais. What we'd like to focus on also, Claire, is a message that we've received from people saying that they'd really welcome your presentation about Care for Calais to be shared with students, and this particular recording to be offered to students and universities. And if that's something that you give consent to, that would be absolutely brilliant. Again, there will be more questions at the end as part of the panel, but today we really want to make sure that all of our presenters get an opportunity to share their story and their work. So we will come back to Claire and other colleagues who have already given presentations to date. So at this point, I would like to give a warm welcome also to Amy, who will talk about her work involved with Social Workers Without Borders. And again, I have no doubt it's going to be a very powerful presentation. Also, just to share that we are very aware that the content of the presentations and materials shared can result in triggers for people as well. So there are colleagues online, Liz Howard and Denise Monks, that if you want to message them as well, they're happy to have separate discussions with you offline. Okay, so moving over to Amy now. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much. Can I just start by thanking my social work colleagues and Claire, obviously, for their really powerful presentations. I think it's absolute testimony to the dignity and humanity of people that we're doing work like this, and sends a very clear message that together we're stronger. So I want to thank my colleagues for their contributions for today. Can I have the first slide, please? Oh, actually, go on to the second one, to the next one. So it'll be no surprise to anybody that the issues affecting people are often as a direct result of inequality, and that the power structures maintaining inequality actively work to prevent people accessing what they need to thrive. Because people are forced into the margins of society, it also becomes harder to name their discrimination and seek to remedy the poverty that they're experiencing. Next slide, please. Social workers support people who are adversely affected by borders, which we believe are used as a way of controlling access to resources. And I think this quote sums it up beautifully. The violence of borders today is emblematic of a broader system that seeks to preserve privilege and opportunity for some by restricting access to resources and movement for others. Next slide, please. So a bit like Claire, my journey started a little bit late in about 2018. I was busy collecting aid and traveling to Calais with friends, making people in warehouses cups of tea, sorting out things to distribute, while my social work colleagues were a step ahead of me, and they were already using their skills to create bespoke assessments and provide evidence for children and families to try and resolve their immigration difficulties. The engagement with these skills, with this work, has really expanded our skills and our knowledge, and perhaps more importantly, deepened our connection to the roots of ethical social justice-based social work. Next slide, please. So there are 3 strands to Social Workers Without Borders. Firstly, the direct work strand. We usually receive referrals from solicitors requesting either a best interest assessment or a human rights-based assessment for people who are affected by borders. I'll talk a little bit about which people who are affected in a minute. Occasionally we get funding, but much of our work is completed pro bono. That means free. So we receive referrals, we discuss them, and we try to accept most of them. Occasionally we do have to decline if we don't have capacity, but then we allocate a case coordinator and 2 social workers. One is a qualified social worker, and the second or assisting social worker can be a social work student. And the process of gathering evidence, assessing the people that were there to work with, and providing strong analysis in a written report is hugely time consuming. In our trustee report from 2021 to 22, we estimated that it was just under 1,800 hours on assessing alone. Next slide, please. So we saw a total of 116 people within 32 cases last year. That's not including other people who were involved in the assessments giving evidence, like mental health workers, GPs, faith-based professionals, school professionals, midwives, health visitors. I mean, we see people from all walks of life when we're creating a comprehensive social work assessment. 29 of the assessments involved children and of course adult family members, and 3 solely involved adults. Within every single case, we provided crucial evidence that allows the judge to own a clear rationale for their decision making, and the appointed social workers use their skills, knowledge and values to make. So I'll echo what Claire said a moment ago, that we utilise the skills that social workers are trained for in a way that promotes social justice. Next slide, please. Not all assessments are successful. We don't always get to know what the outcomes are. Sometimes when we do get to know the outcomes, when we've heard first-hand accounts of the trauma people have been through, whether it's police brutality in Nigeria for being gay, or being sex trafficked from Albania through Italy into the UK, you know, whatever the circumstances, when we have a successful outcome as a team, we really feel that gives us the impetus to continue. It's quite tiring work, and when we have successes, it means something to us. But occasionally we have our reports aren't accepted at first glance. And last year I was involved in creating an addendum report to a case that I'd coordinated, where I had to offer a really strong rebuttal to the Home Office, who not only questioned but criticised social work qualifications, social work experience, and the methods that we use to gather and analyse evidence. So Naomi Jackson, who's the developmental lead for Social Workers Without Borders, and I co-created the report. And the comments on this slide, I mean, we knew that creating this report would either allow the judge for the family to remain, or would link in with the Home Office critique. And so we're really proud of these comments, because what the judge is ultimately saying is that Social Workers Without Borders and the work that we do squarely places us as experts in our fields. It set a precedent to accept that we are qualified, experienced, and hold excellent, valid ethics around the work that we do. So that was amazing. But most importantly, it meant that the judge made the decision for the family to remain in the UK. Next slide, please. So the second element is our campaigns, and we believe that, or we know that the migrant justice sector, as social workers, I think this is what Emilio and colleagues were saying earlier, we have a voice where others don't always have that voice. So we have a responsibility to advocate for excellent social work practice within refugees, asylum seekers and migrants' lives. One of the things that we did recently was write a letter to Priti Patel, I think it was last year, objecting to hostile immigration policies. And this was co-signed by a couple of other social work organisations, including BASW. Thank you very much. We have been working with Solidarity Knows No Borders. I believe somebody's going to put a link in the chat, to create bespoke training webinars and training workshops for people. And so if you'd like to know more about that, click on that link. The training is going to be epic. It's not just from Social Workers Without Borders, it's from lots of organisations who come together under the umbrella of Solidarity Knows No Borders. Next slide, please. So this is where I spend most of my time now, in the education section. We, along with other volunteers, we deliver training and bespoke workshops, mainly in UK universities, but we're branching out a little bit. We aim to illuminate the very real tensions between hostile immigration policies and social care policy contexts, and how that impacts on people's human rights, their dignity, their access to resources. During the provision of these trainings, sessions and workshops, we try to create a space where students and practitioners can really consider how social workers can practice in solidarity with people affected by borders. So one example would be, make sure you have an interpreter. How on earth can you make sure you've assessed on the basis of need if you don't understand fully what the need is? So we need to make sure we push. So that's just one example. An example of a bespoke piece of training is training that we provided on what a best interest assessment looks like to a group of solicitors in chambers, to help them understand the best interest assessment process, which hopefully will impact on how they frame their instructions when they're referring to Social Workers Without Borders, which will in turn improve our engagement with the people and improve our reports, the analysis and the outcomes in the judicial system. Next slide, please. I've got to use notes, otherwise I won't remember everything I've got to say, so apologies if I'm looking down. So, without a shadow of a doubt, the UK's immigration and asylum system is unjust, and Social Workers Without Borders is a rights-based charity. We view people as inherently holding rights, not needing to have them bestowed upon them by the state, that they, by virtue of being human, they hold those rights. We also believe strongly that understanding the global and national context can help social workers practice in a way that dispels shame and sheds light on which interventions are most appropriate. It helps us hone in on what analysis is needed when we're working with people who are affected by borders. We do, and we will continue as an organisation to take a strong anti-discriminatory and anti-oppressive practice approach. Regardless, we'll be continuing to do that. Next slide, please. So when I present at universities, or where I always tell people that the first time I had a conversation about this this concept of foregrounding legislation and looking at it as looking at legislation through as if it was a lens was with Naomi Jackson, and we had such an incredible conversation. It really enabled me to understand how we use different legislations as a lens which impacts the work we do with people, which impacts our recommendations, and then impacts on outcomes for the human beings that we're working with. So, for example, immigration legislation serves to reinforce barriers, effectively excluding people, and is inherently discriminatory. Social care, and this includes the illegal migration bill. It's that no person is illegal. It's an absurd concept. Yeah. Stick to my notes, Amy. Social care legislation is inherently paternalistic. So it views it effectively views the state as being in the position of awarding somebody care or not. So basically whether somebody deserves or doesn't deserve to have service provision. Whereas human rights law is non-discriminatory. It applies to absolutely everybody. And arguably in the current climate, most importantly, it can serve to protect people from state powers. Next slide, please. I'm not sure how much time I've got left, so I'm not going to read verbatim off the slide, but we know at Social Workers Without Borders that social workers are often highly motivated by social justice. So we offer some suggestions of aspects of practice that could contribute towards a shift in attitudes towards asylum seekers and refugees. I urge you to challenge cultures of disbelief. Be brave in how you challenge unjust or poor practice, and make recommendations based not on immigration systems, but on need. If you include serious case reviews in your work as social workers, you are not only providing evidence, you are also enabling yourself to share the need for understanding around the impact of poverty on people affected by borders and the need to access resources such as healthcare. There are serious case reviews. You just need to do an online search or look at the NSPCC website to see how children and babies and very small children have died in the UK of malnutrition because they have no recourse to public funds. It's deeply concerning to us that this is happening in 2023 when there is enough for everybody. There's enough to go round. Next slide, please. So first of all, thank you. I'm just going to end up very briefly. Thank you for listening to me. Sorry if my voice was a bit shaky. I was trying to get through everything. we would like to build capacity at Social Workers Without Borders, just like Claire in Care for Calais. And that means we need volunteers. If you're a social worker or a student, we'd love to have you involved. I've stayed around for 4 years, you know, working in the direct work group and now education, and I provide supervision now for the direct work group, and I will continue to do this because it's something that I feel strongly about. So thank you, BASW, for having me. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And there's hopefully a link in chat if you'd like to volunteer. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. And again, very, very powerful messages. There's a real synergy in terms of all that the presenters are sharing today. So again, just to re-emphasize some of those key points, you've talked about the importance and partnership with the judiciary system and how social workers can be perceived as experts and must be. You've talked about the importance of campaign and education and voice, and certainly the sense of, you know, a hostile immigration and that reality of a hostile immigration policy and reform agenda, as well as the importance of voice of social workers in terms of social justice. So again, thank you so much. I'd like to ask at this point for all panel members now to put on your cameras, please, and to join us in the panel discussion. So thank you again for all of your contributions. It's been absolutely fantastic session. This is now an opportunity for questions, and we already have a couple of questions that have come through on the chat. And again, I'll just be checking some of the questions, so maybe looking down. But for the first question, I'd like to put this to Emilio, Eleanor and Sophia. And the question, although it makes reference to the UK government, I think it's applicable to many governments. So in the UK, the government continues to say that migrants are coming in illegally and treats people who come to our shores as criminals. However, there are hardly any legal routes. Are there any countries in Europe which you believe do have true, effective legal routes? And that may apply to other panel members as well who want to come in. But if we just start off initially with Emilio, Eleanor and Sophia. And just a reminder to come off mute as well.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think that unfortunately in Europe at the present moment there is an agreement in the idea of strengthening borders and making migrants more and more difficult to enter the EU borders and also the European borders. And this is very, very clear. And of course, it is very helpful for some political parties who are really benefiting from these discourses, and we are also very worried about that. Of course, there have been some examples that when you want to do things in a different way, they can be done. For example, when I referred previously to the Temporary Protection Directive at the EU. Of course, what this directive intended was to pave the way for Ukrainian migrants and refugees basically, to come to the EU territory. And they granted these refugees a very high standard of dignity. They were well treated, they had access to mental health benefits, they could be, they received a very good treatment. In comparison to other migrants coming from third countries which were not treated in the same way. So many voices have raised saying that why don't this treatment is extended to other migrants or refugees coming to EU? If, of course, the results have been favorable, have been successful, why not extending this? Another example is the Irish regularization process. Many countries in Europe have implemented regularization process to arise situations of irregularity. I don't like to speak about illegal immigration because nobody is illegal. We can say migrants and refugees in irregular situation, which is quite different from this. So the Irish government, the Republic of Ireland government, implemented a scheme for people who were in a regular situation to become regular situation, and they did not. And this process was differential because it was very quick, very respectful, and made many people to become regular. And the differential point was that this process did not depend on the willingness of employers or other people in the receiving countries, but just the migrants themselves, and that made a difference. So, of course, things can be done. Of course, it is possible to be more creative and less rigid, but we need a political willingness. And of course, political parties know that the discourse of hardline policies towards migrants gives more votes, whether they are in the left or in the right. Of course, it's not the same, but in many cases you can find similarities. I don't know if we have answered your question. Is it fine?
You certainly have, Emilio. And are there any other panel members that would want to come in on this question at all? We have got quite a number of questions to be going through.
Let's whiz on to the next question.
You're
I think
happy with
Emilio
that?
did a grand job.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, the next question, it's directed at BASW as well. So although I'm chairing, I will do a response, but it would also be really good to hear from the different organisations represented today. So why is it that refugees from Ukraine are treated better or differently from other refugees from other countries? Is the human rights different in terms of where you come from? What is BASW doing about this, and has it come to their attention? So on behalf of BASW, I'd like to share that we have a policy, ethics and human rights committee, and that as an association, we certainly have challenged what we perceived as racist practice as well. And we will challenge, for example, the Home Office and areas such as age assessments. I think we do need to look at institutional racism as well, in terms of migration and people seeking asylum. And I think that question is a fair question. I think it's how we give sanctuary to all people. But I hear you loud and clear, and I think it's a very valid question. And I think it does exist in terms of differences and perceptions. And it can also be about political alliances with different nations across the globe. Is there anybody again on the panel that would like to come in and respond any further to that point? Amy?
Yeah, I would echo the way things are spun politically. I think that's got a lot to do with that. I'm not going to say very much about that because I could possibly spend a week talking about that. It's very complicated, but I will point out that there's also, as I said earlier, a deeply a racist, discriminatory aspect to it. If you look at things, you could start to look at that as well. So if you're positioning yourself as an anti-racist social worker, you could reflect on that.
Thank you, Amy. Really pertinent. The next question I'll again direct to Claire. So just bear with me. How are Care for Calais managing the European laws which criminalising helping migrants?
That is an interesting one. So the countries that have traditionally or so far criminalised humanitarian aid workers, Greece and Italy, we don't work in. And in France, we have so far been reasonably lucky because in France, our mission is purely humanitarian So in France, we don't advocate against the French government. All our advocacy work is in the UK. But this year we have seen some frightening developments. We saw a call from the British government, in fact, to ask the French government the British government wanted the French government to stop British charities working in France, which is frightening. The French government has taken some actions against certain British charities in Calais, of which we were not one, I think because of our lack of advocacy work in France. But that the fact that we are not one does not make it any less disturbing that there are actions being taken against other charity workers in France. It's still a very concerning development. From our point of view, more concerning that the Home Affairs Select Committee wrote to us this year to ask whether we were encouraging people to cross the channel, which is a deeply shocking accusation because we have worked with the families of people who have drowned in the channel. We are the last people who would want people to make dangerous journeys. The fact that we give food and clothes to people who are hungry and cold in no way means that we want them to make dangerous journeys. We are advocating for safe routes because we don't want people to make dangerous journeys. But that is a step towards our government suggesting that aid workers should be criminalised. And for anybody who doesn't know, we are subject to one of the longest running charity commission inquiries ever, that's now more than 2.5 years running, which is indicative, I think, of our government not liking the fact that we are working with refugees in Calais, and one of their main policy objectives is to stop refugees coming from Calais. So the way that things are going in this country is definitely a concern following the criminalisation of aid workers across Europe. Know that our government follows policies that have been followed in other countries. A lot of our refugee policies are based on policies that were followed by Australia. So it's not a surprise to see this trend being followed in the UK, and it is definitely a serious concern.
Thank you, Claire. And a really frightening concern as well. And that kind of leads us on really to the next question that we've had from the audience. What practical things do you think, and this is to all panel members, that you think BASW as an association and our members could be doing to be pushing the humanitarian agenda? Is that Eleanor?
Hi, this is
Hi.
Sophia.
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 So I can't see the names on the screen. Welcome, Sophia. So go ahead.
Very nice to be here and very powerful messages. I think this question is of great importance because we may reflect, we may get very angry, but what we are going to do with this anger and this disappointment that we get from policies. I think it is very important, as it was shown in our presentation, to make the invisible visible. And being in the field, in the front line as professionals, we have so much evidence of what is happening. We need to evidence that, we need to collect data, and we need to make what is happening and how people are affected from these policies. We need to make this visible. Of course, we need also to protect ourselves. And I think this is where solidarity and connecting with others and making coalitions, it's very important. So using associations, using unions at local, national, but also international levels, it's very important. There have been examples that social workers have been persecuted worldwide as human rights defenders, but there has been international action, joint social action to advocate for these professionals, that they are acting based on our common ethics, that it's about empowerment, it's about advocacy, it's about human dignity and human rights. And this is very powerful, not being alone, defending human rights, but together we can join the voices, our voices and our actions. And BASW is one of these associations that can contribute to that.
Thank you so much. Any other contributions from other panel members in terms of what other things BASW or all members could be doing?
At the end, yeah, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
So at the end of my presentation, I gave it a brief list of things that student social workers and qualified social workers or academics can do. But I think the point that Sophia made about naming what's happening is really, really important, because when you're at the margins of society, you are effectively silenced. You have no voice, and if people in power have their way, you'll have no access to advocacy. So naming it and providing that evidence is deeply, deeply important, and you can do that in a huge number of ways, making sure that you practice best practice in social work, evidence-based practice, and that means including the impact of policy, using serious case reviews to really paint the picture of what happens when while people are dying of malnutrition, including the voice of service users. Project 17 have created some amazing videos that really presses home what happens to children when their families have no recourse, or when they're migrants, asylum seekers. And also, don't forget who you are. Your trigger warning, I'm not calling anybody a tool here. You are your best tool. You take yourself with you everywhere you go. So align yourself with those values. Make sure you soak up that education, keep reading, listen to people when they're talking about the impact of policy, and remember that you're valuable as a social worker. Your voice contributes. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Absolutely. Really important, again, in terms of the connection and global connections as well, and having a voice. And to members out there or non-members in the audience, there are many ways that you can get involved in BASW, both in terms of thematic groups, at a campaign level, a lobbying level. We have a journal, PSW, in terms of writing your views and opinions. So we would encourage you to get involved at any level you can. And again, today we've had a call out for volunteers with some of the charity organisations that are represented. So please consider, those options as well. Another question that we've received, and again, although it may focus in terms of England from a local authority perspective, I would also put this out to all of our colleagues on the panel today, because it relates to all social workers in many ways. How can we support social workers to challenge practice? And for example, that may be stopping from doing age assessments when they are requested to do so, because sometimes social workers can feel really powerless in terms of the situation. So again, what guidance and advice would you provide there? Go ahead.
Can I add?
Sophia, yeah. I think I've got the right one now.
Elena.
Hey!
Now I'm Elena. Happy Social Work Day, everyone. Thank you for this invitation, and thank you to the reflection that we are sharing. It's a very huge question, but I want to share this thought that for me as a social worker and for our students is important. I think that it would be perfect if social workers can change by themselves the systems, but the reality is that they are not the system. We are not the migration system in Italy or in Europe. So considering this, that we are a protagonist in the system, but beyond other people other level, other responsibilities, could support us in focusing on the power that we have. Because social workers have to consider the power that we have, not only the power that we lack. Because it would be great if we would have more power, but we have power. We have more power than the people we attend. So we must resist and using our powers towards the people, towards the rights, towards advocacy. And I think that about this very bad practice, also in Italy, occur a law saying that to social workers working in municipalities that they must report to the police irregular migrants, for example. And this is very conflicting with the nature of the mission of social work. This exposes social workers to ethical dilemma, and it's clear that exclude people from the help that they need. I don't have an answer, but I think that a sense of community could help each social worker in being a part of the system and in taking a stand on this topic, because there is a matter of competencies, there is a matter of methods and techniques, but there is a matter of to take a stand, to take a position on the topic. And this concerns all social work, but especially social work and migration, that is our topic. And my last thought is that to do this process, I think that we must consider that social workers, beyond their commitment and ethical posture, we are not immune to the risk to reproduce oppressive dynamics or prejudices, because they are part of the relationship and of the human relationship. So I think that we must start from ourselves, but with awareness about the fact that we are not the system, we contribute to the system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eleanor. And I think it's again a very pertinent message in terms of social workers also have the power, and it is about how we work within the system to make change. Absolutely. Amy, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah,
you'd like to come in.
I almost didn't need to come in because you eloquently ended on the point I was going to make, that if we carry on rushing in our social work practice and in the way that we provide education, we really do run the risk of replicating dominant narratives. We must slow down. We must reflect. Otherwise, we don't see in the minutiae of what we're doing, in the detail of what we're doing, how we are propping up a system that we're trying to fight, that we're trying to resist. I probably should have said in my presentation that Social Workers Without Borders deeply ethically object to age assessments, and we refuse. We don't entertain referrals where age assessments are part of that. So, and if I was still in frontline practice, I would probably make a name for myself by refusing to do them. I think they're inherently unjust. Yeah. Thank you.
And just to reiterate as well to the person who raised the question, there is support through advice and representation services in BASW across the association. We also look at networking our members in terms of branches and special interest groups. So we really hope that members are not feeling isolated and that you can make contact with us. And again, going back to Eleanor's point, we do have the power. It's how we support and change the system. Okay, we've got another question. The questions are coming through thick and thin, which is great. So we've got another question for all of the panel members. So how do we ensure that social work qualification routes continue to include strong ethics and values around human rights and don't change to suit any government agenda? Who'd like to go first on that one?
I mean, I can always speak. I've always got something to say. I mean, we have to include international social work. You know, I'm an academic as well, so I work in a university. So when I started 3 years ago, I was designing modules in the way I teach so that it wasn't 100% white middle-class men that I was referencing. So I was including migrant voices so it's got to start from, we think about policies going to change everything, but like Eleanor said, we can change things from the ground. So yeah, and also shameless plug, you could ask Social Workers Without Borders to present in your organisation, and then you'd be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And Sophia?
Amy, you are invited in my class. I just wanted to echo Amy. I think it's very important to take responsibility also as academics, and our classes are not labs outside world. Our work is in the street. And we need to be part of the voices in the street and in the communities. So connecting classroom with the community is very important. Several times in our classes in Greece, we question if we are in this culture of silence. Amy said the culture of disbelief, but it's also the culture of silence, and how we can be part of this voice in the community by connecting with social movements. Today, we participated as social work department. We celebrated Social Work Day with a demonstration and national strike. And we participated in this strike, giving voice to what does it mean to be a social worker without resources, with violation of human rights, what people need. And we need to take also the example as academics with our students being in the community with social movements and other social issues. Also, we need also to advocate for our profession and our teaching in terms of content, in terms of context, to the higher management of the universities. Academia is getting more and more target and market-driven orientated. It's very difficult to have a voice, even as an academic, especially as lower as in the hierarchy, especially if there are issues of gender, race. You may not have a voice. Again, coalitions, getting together with associations. It's very important to advocate for our profession and our ethics, and we need to keep our teaching connected with these communities.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you.
And again, I think it highlights what Amelia was talking about earlier in terms of the importance of connection between academia, social work, education, practice and action. So thank you very much for that comment. Just before we move on, in terms of the timing, we've got well, about 5 minutes left before closing the event. So what I'd like to ask is each of the panel members to give one key message to social workers in terms of what they can do to influence change in whichever way that may be. And I'm going to start off with Claire, if that's okay.
Okay. I would say we need your voices, so please do look at our social media and share the messages on there, especially right now when the illegal migration bill is going through. We need every voice that counts right now. And like I said, you make the best volunteers. We would love to have you. Your skills are so important. So whether it's in the UK, we work right across the UK, or if you can come over to Calais, you can volunteer even for 2 or 3 days in Calais. We'd love to have you. Please have a look at our website. Thank you.
Okay, Sophia?
We are a community. We have power, we have voice. Let's use it to reflect and act together. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Emilio?
I think that my message would be, we must love the time of the attempts, and we must love the hour that never is productive.
Thank you. Eleanor?
I wanted to say that we are the present and probably we have future social workers here. And about migration, what I am thinking at the end is that it's important to keep in mind that we accompanied people in a journey, in a life journey, but it's important to consider that it's not our journey, it's their journey. So that means to put the people and their experiential knowledge at the center of our thinking, research, education, and intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Amy?
Aren't you all amazing? Every time you spoke, I was thinking, oh, just what they said. I guess what Claire said, because yeah, we'd love to have you volunteer. And as a takeaway, it can feel disempowering, you know, given everything that's going on in the hostile environment. But ultimately, social workers are in a position to make a difference to the lives of people who are vulnerable. So hold that in your heart.
Oh, such lovely messages from all of you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you so much for your time and commitment today. And to all of those that have participated in the chat and asked questions. We appreciate that some of the content of the event can be upsetting, and that's why we've provided the opportunity to contact staff as well. But just also to summarise some of the key messages, and I think one of the most pertinent message for me has been about making the invisible visible, and whether that's through the stories and the narratives and the life experience of people who are seeking migration and seeking sanctuary. It's so important. And to also mirror making the invisible visible in terms of poor and dangerous social policy reform. It's about how we become champions, how we make sure that voices are heard, and that as a community of social workers, that the core of social work is about our ethics, our values, our standards, and our commitment to social justice and humanity. And it's been a real privilege today. I'd like to thank all of you and every single participant. For me personally and professionally, it's been a real privilege to be able to chair this event today, because I think the messages of power and humanity and mankind has been incredibly powerful and emotional, and I know I just feel so strong in terms of being a part of this community. It's fantastic. So thank you so much, and I look forward to us all working together again and celebrating, as for the rest of the day, International World Social Work Day. Thank you so much, folks. Bye-bye.